everyone, welcome back to another virtual tour. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, but right now all the early spring blooms are really starting to pop out, and on this sunny day it's a really great time to see them. So we wanted to take you around and show you what's in bloom today. And you can see behind us this really large old magnolia is blooming. This is a favorite of a lot of our visitors. So I'll go ahead and turn this camera around and we'll go take a closer look at that magnolia. So we're down here right next to this magnolia, and you can see it's in full bloom. It smells really beautiful on this sunny day too, kind of bringing out the fragrance on this warm sunny day. We'll get a closer look at one of these blooms.
So this is a Loebneri's Magnolia, which is a cross between Cobus Magnolia and Star Magnolia. This one here in particular is a favorite for visitors. It's been here since 1987, back on the south side of the garden by the hedge maze and Tower Grove house. And it's, gosh, maybe 30 feet tall and super wide, and I think one of the reasons people love it is these branches that sweep out really low to the ground, and so the blooms are just right here at eye level for everyone, even little kids. And yeah, every time the wind picks up, as Kristina mentioned, you just get this big waft of floral scent. And because these blooms have been open for a few days, also every time the breeze comes, you get this lovely little shower of petals falling down. So this tree is definitely at peak. There are a handful of blooms that haven't opened on it yet. But it is at peak probably now for this week, and then it will be on the backside. And yeah, you can see the petals kind of falling through the branches as the wind blows. I was back in my office today, and I just happened to glance up at my wall calendar, my garden wall calendar, which is still on March of 2020, and that magnolia is the prominent feature image for the month of March 2020.
You're right, that is. I remember that.
I don't know if I'm like other people. I just have refused to flip that calendar.
I think mine is still on that date too.
So we're walking here past the formal garden, and you can see all the tulips are, the foliage is up. But we don't have anything in the way of blooms yet. That's definitely more of an April flower that we're still waiting on to start to show little pops of color, but it's all here. It's going to be looking good in another few weeks. I'm always excited to see how the designs play out, because they plant all these bulbs. The garden staff and volunteers plants somewhere between 80 to 100,000 bulbs in the fall, and nobody but the horticulturist that designs it really knows what it's going to look like until you kind of get this surprise reveal in April. So I'm really excited that we're that close to the big reveal this year. This is a great spot for tulips, and then also by our pools in front of the climatron is another great place to see those bulbs. Even the front entry drive as you come in.
And up ahead, while we are walking past, should mention the Sachs Museum. Right now there's an exhibition on wine and the plants that make wine called Grafting the Grape. So that exhibition actually closes the end of this month. So if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you come by March 31st, because that will be the last day that it is open. And it's a great exhibit, a lot to learn about a plant that many of us benefit from and enjoy the beverages that come from it. We've got daffodils starting to bloom as well. The last time we did a virtual tour, I think, was maybe late January or early February. And even at that time, you could already see the leaves coming up, the foliage. But now they're finally blooming. So it feels like a long time coming since we first noticed them come up, and it's really great to see them open.
And you have a few other little flowers in this area. I'm gonna get it wrong. It's always helpful to me when there's a sign that I can read, and then sound a little bit more like I know what I'm talking about. But I want to say that's like a scilla or a Siberian squill, or but this little sort of blue flower here. So that's a really nice contrast with the yellow of the daffodils. And I can see here in the mausoleum garden, I can see those little pops of blue right there along the ground level. And so we have a lot of plants in different areas that kind of come out this time of year and create these little patches right there along the ground. So really pretty, in particular, just being next to all those daffodils. I believe these are the cultivar name or hybrid name is Emperor. So these are always one of the first daffodils to bloom at the garden in spring. I can tell you that for as good as these look, we're at maybe 10% bloom for daffodils. So there is still quite a few varieties all throughout the garden that haven't hit their stride yet, haven't started to bloom. So really in the next few weeks is going to be a great time to come out and take a look at the daffodil collection, because we have so many different types of daffodils. It's really neat to see all that variety.
And you can see some of these patches back here of green that still haven't bloomed yet. So you can imagine how much is going to be going on once those do start blooming. And on our left here is Tower Grove House, which we are very excited to tell you, if you haven't heard yet, is reopening this weekend, March 26th, for the first time in 2 years. So this has been closed since March of 2020, like we were just talking about. And it is finally reopening to guests. There will be an exhibit that hasn't been seen yet, that at this point has been years in the making, about a trip that a previous resident of the house, William Trelease, took to explore Alaska with other botanists and even artists and other experts of the time. So it should be a very interesting exhibit, and you can see it this Saturday. And that's not the only thing that is reopening. Also, the Children's Garden will be reopening this Saturday. And what's exciting about that is this year we no longer have to require timed tickets, so you can just come and enjoy at your leisure. Birthday parties will be back in the children's garden. Cafe Flora is opening this Saturday. So a lot going on this weekend to come enjoy as the season really takes off here, as you can see with all these flowers around us. It's a great timing for this seasonal spring reopenings.
Yeah, so here as we're coming along, speaking of those flowers, we've got a lot right here. So these little white flowers I think might be Siberian squill. One of these days I'm going to get it right. Something I'm pointing at is going to be Siberian squill, whether it's this or it's those little blue flowers from earlier. I
think this is Scilla and the blue is Siberian squill, I believe.
And I think they're fairly close botanically, so they're all. But don't hold us to that. You know, if you're if you can set the record straight in the comments, please feel free to do so. But we've got lots of those, these little flowers coming in, the crocus here in the field, a few different kinds of spring crocus, yellows, purples, whites. So this is and there, I don't see any from where we're at the moment, but there's lots of little irises as well in this field.
Yeah.
So this is this
wonder if we could find
bulb meadow is actually kind of designed to be a no-mow space. So this is not mowed like a lawn. It's left to kind of grow up throughout the year and has lots of little bulbs that make appearances at various times. So there's the spring crocus, there's also autumn crocus in this area. And then over here, so this is what we were seeing that small patch of earlier. And now you can see, I love the way this looks. It just is surrounding this whole tree. This giant dogwood is all this carpet of blue flowers here. Lots of pops of colors. Here's some more of that crocus.
Here's some, you can kind of see the variety here. Like here's a yellow one, a darker purple behind, and then this lighter purple here.
And then sort of behind us on our right, you can see another magnolia, a different type of magnolia from the one we were showing off earlier, that's in pretty good bloom right now. It's definitely, this next week or so is going to be peak for a lot of different kinds of magnolias, but it's certainly not the only time that we're going to see magnolia blooms throughout the spring and even into the summer, as some of those later blooming species and varieties like Sweet Bay magnolia and Southern magnolia, those come way later in the season. But this is a saucer magnolia, and there's actually a couple of them here next to this gazebo at the end of the rose garden, and just really pretty deep pinks. So in contrast to the magnolia that we were showing off at the start of the tour that has blooms that are mostly white, this definitely has some darker pinks.
You know, you can see all the way from here, this, I'm gonna see if I can kind of point it out with my finger. right there. You can see this bright yellow pop of color. That's a Forsythia bush that is in full bloom right now. Kind of happened over the weekend, maybe even overnight, but that is so bright and full of yellow blooms. I don't think we'll make it over to it today on our virtual tour, but we were quite a ways from that bush and you can see it all the way from here, so you can imagine how great it looks up close. And that's definitely something that is blooming strongly this week, all out, full force. So definitely keep an eye out for those Forsythias.
The blue ones are Scylla. I found a sign, but I think, like I said, I think they're all sort of related. We're seeing lots of other little close to the ground things that are blooming now. Like here's some hellebores. This one is called Blue Lady. So these are really pretty flowers. They tend to kind of hang down a little bit, like they're nodding. So being able to see the full form, a lot of times what you see is the kind of the back side of the petal as it's hanging down, but really pretty when you get a full look at it. This is definitely the kind of year. There are lots of shrubs and trees that are starting to bloom, but definitely a good time of year to get low and appreciate all these things that are happening real close to the ground. And all of these, we can see it now, some bees that are taking advantage of these blooms. All of these early blooms, they're sort of taking a risk, because in St. Louis, the average date of our last frost is still a few weeks away in mid-April, and so they're kind of taking a risk by coming out this early, but the reward is that they're not competing with as many other flowers for the pollinators.
Yeah, some of you may remember last year that it snowed on April 20th. So that was quite late for a snow, but it does happen sometimes. So we usually advise here to wait to plant warmer season plants like summer vegetables or annuals until May. And if you do want to plant closer to that April 15th date and take a chance, you can always do things to help, like cover them. If there's going to be a frost, cover your plants. But it's always safe to wait till May.
There's just a different daffodil. Really nice. This piece in the center is called a corona, and so that's one of the things that you'll notice on all the different varieties is the color or shape is different on the corona. So there are some varieties, some of my favorite, where this corona in the center is like peach colored. Mm-hmm. Oh hey, look right there.
Oh my gosh, there's a snake right next to us. Look at that little guy out enjoying the sun. I think he's trying to not be seen,
yeah,
holding totally still.
He's waiting for us to leave, that's for sure.
Yep.
There he goes.
There. Yep. Slithering away.
This is really neat because since not everything is green right now, you can really pick out the color at a distance. Kristina was mentioning that Forsythia, and then that's true of the daffodils. And there's a little pop of red that's catching my eye over here that we'll sort of stop by and show you. This is a Camellia, and it's got some nice bright red blooms on it. I think I've noticed a few, well, maybe just one. I can sort of see one little azalea that's got some pink blossoms that's here in the woodland. We're still definitely a few weeks away from the peak of our azalea and rhododendron collection, but there are a few little early bloomers that are kind of showing off. And again, it's because not everything is greened up, so you can see for distances through our garden spaces and pick up those little bits of color. And it's kind of fun. It's almost like a little bit of a seek and find.
Totally.
As
look at
you're
this.
taking a walk.
I think I see some bluebells.
Yeah.
Just starting. Here's a couple that are open down here. But yeah, you can see these are all getting ready. And a few of them actually opening up.
And a great place to see bluebells is actually at Shaw Nature Reserve, which is the Gardens Nature Reserve in Gray Summit. Down in the floodplain near the Merrimack River, there are big patches of bluebells, and so that's a favorite for all the folks that know about that little secret. They always are sort of calling out there and planning their trip around taking a hike down to the river to see the bluebells. So,
and a lot of times Shaw Nature Reserve is a little ways behind us on things like blooms or fall color, just because of being in an urban heat bubble here at the garden more so. But I would say definitely in the next couple weeks, think about checking that out. And it really, you can smell all the blooms that are in the air too as we're walking. There's kind of a light breeze today, and we keep getting wafts of just beautiful floral smells.
yeah, and I wonder actually if what we're smelling now is this witch hazel here. So that's another plant that is blooming right now. And actually it really likes to bloom when it's cold, so the later we get into spring, the less likely you are to find these blooms. So this is actually a great time to come and see them. We were talking a little bit about advantageous blooming, so witch hazels are definitely in that camp. They'll bloom when it's snowing outside and still very cold, to set themselves apart and not have to compete for pollinators. But this is a species called Ozark witch hazel. The scientific species name is vernalis, Hamamelis vernalis, which it means spring. So this is a witch hazel that blooms in spring, and there's another type of witch hazel that tends to bloom in fall. But they're definitely outliers in that they are either very early in the season or very late at the end of the season.
And it is today, I guess, the second day of spring, so
yeah,
it is
it's
appropriate.
first full day of spring.
Right.
You know, Kristina, it's been a while since I've been here, and I'm noticing something here that I hadn't noticed before in the Japanese garden along the lake. So there is a brand new barrier here for our Lotus Shore. You can see the geese don't seem too bothered by it, but my hunch is that that's not to keep the birds out as much as it is to keep the fish out. So the barrier that was along this shore before was just beneath the water level, and I know that there have been some issues. It's a little harder to maintain when you're dealing with everything being underwater, and this is nice. It gives a nice definition to that area, and
hopefully keeps the fish out.
Yeah, and
so we could see a really big lotus bloom this year potentially, because sometimes that is difficult, competing with the fish eating those before they get to bloom. So definitely something to keep an eye on. That won't be until summertime, but now I'm excited to watch for that. And up ahead we have a beautiful bloom here. This is one of the first cherry trees to bloom, but this is actually an apricot blossom, I believe.
Yeah, they're, you know, it's all sort of it's all the same family. So prunus is the genus that encompasses apricots, cherries, plums. So it's all in the family. So we can call it a cherry tree. You know, cherry is really just the common name. So I think this is called the common name for this is Japanese apricot.
But it looks a lot like a cherry. The blossoms I was just showing you, even the bark. And this is always the earliest of those sort of cherry family trees to bloom every year. So whenever we see this blooming, we know to keep our eye out for what's coming next.
Yeah, and we're standing actually next to you kind of get a little bit of both. This is a really early cherry that's blooming here, and then right next to us is actually one of our latest blooming cherries, the double blossom, the Kanzan cherries, that are still probably a month away from their peak, but you can see little bits and pieces. Like there's a cherry over here that's got a few blooms that's starting to open. There are some weeping cherries that are on this hillside up above Lotus Shore that maybe have some blooms open, but you can see in and amongst all of that brown and gray of the wood, of the backdrop of the trees behind them, you can see the color. Like there's just, in the canopy of those little cherry trees there, it's just the slightest little hint of pink and red as those are getting ready to open.
And I don't know how much that's coming through on the phone, but you'll have to take our word for it, because
or you'll have to come and visit in person and see it for yourself.
Yes. And you can kind of see here.
Yeah, we can get a little bit closer to this one. So this is one of our weeping cherries, and so the general timeline that we follow, we have a few specific types of cherry or cherry relative trees. So we have that super early blooming Japanese apricot that's always kind of first, and then our first real wave of blooms for our cherry collection are these trees here, which are the weeping Kanzan cherries, Prunus pendula. So, so those will be blooming here probably. Gosh, I mean, some of these are already open. So really,
Yeah.
we judge peak by when you've got 75% or more blooms open. So definitely not peak here, but close to it. And so the weeping cherries are the first wave, and then you have the Yoshino cherries, which are those beautiful white blossoms that we have a really big grouping of at the north entrance to the Japanese garden. Those are sort of the second wave, and then those double blooming cherries are sort of that third wave. And there are a handful of other varieties in there as well. I can actually see sort of from where we're at over by the plum viewing arbor. Again, you know, another cherry relative. I think it's a Prunus cerasifera thundercloud is the name, and commonly they'll call it a cherry plum. So it makes fruit that tastes like plums, but they're about the size of a cherry, and I can see little pops of flowers there as well.
And maybe now you can see, now that we're under these trees above us.
I get a nice little blue backdrop here. There's not really much open,
but you can definitely see the buds.
Yeah, and there's enough pink in them that you can pick that out of the landscape. Again, maybe doesn't show up well on a phone, so that's just the excuse you need to come down here and see it for yourself. But yeah, as we kind of come around, there's a little bit of some flowering quince here that's got some red blooms. Got lots of azaleas that are not even close yet. They'll still be a few weeks away, closer to mid-April, to the end of April.
Oh wow, look at this tree is already leafing out here.
Yeah, so this is a crabapple. So that's, you know, crab apples and cherries are I think two really popular flowering trees, the trees everybody kind of looks for in the spring. And with the cherries, they'll put out their flowers first before the foliage. And then the flowers will, petals will fall off, and then the leaves will come out. And with crab apples, it kind of works the opposite. So they'll push their leaves out first, and then the blooms will follow shortly thereafter, after the leaves come out. But they tend to be so full of blooms that they're still really full canopies in terms of flower coverage. But yeah, you can see here all of these trees in this little section are these cherry plums.
And as we're passing here on the right here, this is a star magnolia. So we were talking about how some of those magnolias are already blooming, others aren't quite there yet. You can see this is one that's just begun. This is the only flower on this tree that's fully open. And you can see some buds are still pretty much completely closed. Others in that in-between stage. And there are a lot of star magnolias like this around the Japanese garden. So this will be one to keep an eye out for in the next week or so. Week or two, maybe.
Yeah, and just to tie into the beginning of our tour, we were talking about that big magnolia, the Loebneri Magnolia, that we started our tour at. And this is one of the two species that was crossed to make that tree. So this is the star magnolia, and then the other is the cobus magnolia, is the other species that were crossed together to make that tree that we were showcasing at the beginning of the tour.
I thought we'd get up a little closer to some of these cherries here. So you can see what we were talking about. Very much pink, but not quite open yet. Well, there's one that's kind of opening a little bit.
Yeah. And these trees are trying real hard to make a liar out of me because they have a little bit of foliage coming through. But actually, if you look at the more mature trees, they really don't have any leaves out to speak of. This one that is nice and eye level for us is a relatively new planting in this area, but the trees that are more established are definitely full of buds with no foliage to speak of, and they're real close. You can see they're right there. So a few nice sunny warm days, I say, as we're about to get some rain. But you know, rain's probably good for them as well. So I don't know that we'll be able to pick it up on our phone camera, but I can see all the turtles.
Oh, you're right.
Over there against the shore of the lake, all sunning themselves.
I think they're a little too small to see on this camera, but I have been seeing them out pretty much any day in the past couple weeks that it's been sunny, so definitely something to watch for if you come out here anytime soon to visit.
You know what I realized, Kristina?
What's that?
I feel silly now. I don't know that they built a new wall around the lake. I think the level of the lake is just a little low.
I think so too. I wonder if there's some kind of work going on though, or if maybe it was drained a bit in order to update
I
that
definitely
wall,
know
because you
that
can see that it's
there
a
are
little
some
more
of those
solid.
stones have fallen out before, but I bet that's part of it.
So it looks like there's some work going on to improve the barrier.
So to correct the record. We're learning in real time here, folks.
We hope you're learning with us. Well, on that note, we will definitely be keeping our eye on these cherries. We know those are a favorite bloom for a lot of people. But for today, we're going to wrap up today's tour and encourage you again to come visit this weekend. Enjoy so many blooms that are already out, more that will probably be here even in the next 5 or 6 days, and of course those seasonal reopenings as well. So thank you for coming along with us. We will see you again sometime soon.